Op moves into a new place with entitled neighbors who demand he trim his trees so they can have a better view through their windows. While Op is out of town, they cut the trees down as a favor, so as a favor, Op makes them lose their house. Posted by you/tracksuit tirade. Op made a post in our/legal advice that was titled, "Neighbors disfigured my trees and bushes, claim previous owner gave them permission?" I moved this month, to Washington State, and my yard borders the windows of the neighboring property. The neighbor's yard is on the other side of their house, so their kitchen, living room, one of their upstairs bedrooms, and, based on what I can best ascertain, the window to a study, are pressed right against the property dividing line between the two yards, a small stone path. Along the edge of my property, but not overlapping with the divider, which a surveyor verified is accurate when we bought the home, we have 3 black walnut trees and 4 bushes. We're not 100% sure what the bushes are, but after sending pictures to a botanist friend and consulting the internet, the best guess is honey locusts. About a week after we moved in, the new neighbors approached us and said the previous tenant had promised to trim the trees because they blocked the view from their windows. I called the previous owner, and he said he promised nothing of the sort. In fact, half the reason he planted the bushes along the existing tree line was because the neighbors had complained about his cookouts, saying they felt they had to draw their curtains for privacy, which they didn't like. So, the bushes were essentially a privacy hedge. The previous owner has just moved into assisted living for dementia patients, though, so I am waiting to get double confirmation from his daughter. We told the neighbors sorry, but no, both because the trees provide nice shade and because, without the bushes on the lower level, they would be able to see directly into our house and vice versa. We went away for the weekend and returned to find 5 large branches and a dozen smaller branches missing from our trees, exactly where their windows had been blocked. The trees now look hideous and diseased because of these giant bald patches and no longer provide privacy or adequate shade. One of our bushes was completely gone, and 2 others were crudely uprooted and unsalvageable. The neighbor mentioned that the black walnut trees had been there since he moved in 60 years ago, and the bushes had been there for 15 years. I figured I was screwed because we don't have security cameras or any proof that they did this. But as a last-ditch attempt, I sent them an email asking if they knew what had happened. They had the audacity to reply as though they'd done us a favor. Their exact words, "Yes, we decided it was unfair for you to shoulder the burden of the previous property owner's unfinished business, so we went ahead and had a crew take care of it out of our own pocket this weekend. No need to thank us, Merry Early Christmas." I'm irate, especially because I had bought my girlfriend a bench swing for one of the trees for Christmas, something she's always talked about having. The trees were not crossing their property line, and the bushes were solidly within our property as well. As mentioned, there's a small dividing stone pathway between the 2 properties, and I also have a recent official survey done just before we moved in. Do I have any recourse, even though they've twisted it to sound like a favor? Much appreciated. Relevant comments. Commenter. You have it in writing that they damaged your property against your will. Get an arborist to evaluate the health of the trees, how much it will cost to treat and care for them, to replace the bush, etc. Obtain survey maps that show they're on your property. Get photographs, if possible, from the prior owners to prove the tree's previous condition. Sue them in court and hold them accountable. If they're willing to pull these shenanigans this early into being neighbors, they're going to keep doing it if you don't assert your rights to your own property. Also, I believe black walnut is highly valuable timber. Get a price for the wood that was taken away, too. Op's response. Yikes. I'll get an arborist to check it out. Thanks. Update 18 days later. I consulted 3 separate arborists officially and had an arborist friend check things over unofficially. The uprooted bushes were honey locusts, and the branches cut from my black walnut were valuable lumber. It was also determined that since the bushes and trees were acting as privacy barriers and no longer serve that purpose, I would require extra compensation to establish a new privacy barrier. Initially, it was going to be $2,300 for the missing honey locust, $1,600 for the first uprooted one, and $1,800 for the second. Then, sweet Jesus, we got to the issue of the black walnut trees. One was cut in such a way that it was permanently damaged and will likely have to be removed, costing them $17,000. The next was deemed to have lost enough lumber to be worth $4,000, and the final one, $25,000. This was the initial decision. There were just a few more steps before everything was finalized. But then wait, there's more. We had 2 arborists at this point, the first and then a second opinion. Then a third, the first we ever called, who came highly rated but was initially unavailable, had a cancellation and got in contact. We figured, why not? Anything to fortify our case. He comes, looks, and observes that our trees have been afflicted by thousand cankers disease. They'll all have to be removed. Worse yet, they may have even exposed other old, vulnerable trees on our property, which the neighbors didn't even touch, to this disease. The first arborist had raised the concern, and a kind Redditor had even written about the condition after my initial posting, but no one caught it until this arborist, as it was still in its early stage. All told, 3 other, less valuable, trees on my property had to come down, all black walnut trees had to come down, and not only do they owe me $158,000, but they'll also be charged with criminal trespassing. Now, I didn't want to be a horrible, vindictive person and target an elderly couple over a dispute like this. So I asked around the neighborhood about their experiences with these neighbors. Resoundingly, they said, "Do it. Press charges." Apparently, in the years they've lived here, they've called the police on kids running a lemonade stand for lacking a permit, called ICE twice on a Filipino family down the road, and had similar bizarre disputes with other neighbors over plants and lawn adornments. It appears they'll have to sell their house to pay me, and they won't be missed. Thank you for all the advice. Relevant comments. Commenter. I have a question. How does discovering the trees are diseased affect the size of the damages? Did the cutting somehow cause it? Commenter 2. Cutting the trees definitely could have made them more susceptible to disease. Think of bark-like skin. Without that protection, it's really easy for an infection to move in. If the neighbors hadn't removed live, healthy branches, the trees might never have gotten sick. Since they cut large branches, the illness likely entered the trunk from there, compromising the health of the entire plant. Commenter explaining what tree law is and how the neighbors nuked their bank account into a ghost town where their savings used to live. As soon as I heard what kind of trees those were and how much damage they did, I audibly gasped. If you spend any time on tree law, you know this is very, very bad. Many states have trouble laws, which means that not only do the offenders need to pay the amount for each tree, but that amount is literally multiplied by 3. So, if the trees add up to $10,000, the person is automatically required to pay $30,000. And, if the damage they caused means the trees need to come down, the offenders need to pay for that and for a replacement. Not just any replacement, but an equal replacement. Meaning, if it was a 60-year-old, 80 feet tall walnut tree, then the neighbors will need to pay for a new 60-year-old, 80 feet tall walnut tree. And, if replacing that tree means fencing or barriers need to be removed, soil needs to be added, or a crane needs to be brought in, then they're paying for that too. Basically, the neighbors will be paying to make the ops yard exactly as it was before they decided to mess up their trees, which adds up quickly. Those neighbors are also morons. I'm sure part of the deal with the crew who did the trimming was that they would graciously remove and dispose of all that lumber. However, since those trees were black walnuts, that lumber is worth big bucks. My God. These people are idiots. I think it's pretty awesome that OP canvassed the neighborhood to find out if these people are jerks or not. Lol. At least they know they're taking people who deserve it to the cleaners. I'd like to think these people will learn their lesson and be kinder next time, but I have a feeling it will only make them behave like much larger, super bitter jerks. Sucks to suck. Tree law ain't nothing to mess with. Especially when it's black walnut trees.